If you've been waiting for years for an asylum interview with USCIS, then this video is for you. So if you're among the million people in the affirmative asylum backlog whose cases are still pending an interview at the asylum office, and you're sick of waiting and you want to get this done with and get on with your life, then I think you're gonna like this training. I'm going to explain to you in this very detailed tutorial how you may be able to finally get your asylum interview scheduled. And this powerful tactic is likely to work where others have failed, yet so few people know about it. So it's called a mandamus lawsuit, and my clients will tell you it's a beautiful thing. We're gonna cover in part 1 of the training what a mandamus lawsuit is. Then in part 2, we'll talk about who can benefit from it. And in part 3, we'll discuss how it actually works step by step. And so then in part 4, we'll go over what the timeline is for getting your asylum interview using this method. And finally, in part 5, I'm gonna address a very important question that I get pretty much every time I discuss suing the government with people who are interested, but might find the prospect a bit daunting. Now stick with me to the very end of this video because I'm also going to share with you a surprising statistic that I think is gonna energize you and give you hope. I'm Brian Manning, and I used to be an asylum officer with the government, but now, as an asylum lawyer, well, I help immigrants all over the country to secure their future in America through asylum. By the way, let me know in the comments if you've got an asylum case pending or are considering applying it. I'd especially like to hear from you if you've been waiting for an asylum interview for multiple years. All right, let's head over to the computer. All right, so if you're sick and tired of being limbo and essentially having your life on hold because you don't know whether you're ultimately going to be able to stay here and build the life in the United States that you've been dreaming about, then you should consider bringing a mandamus lawsuit against the government to force them to move your asylum case forward. I cannot tell you how relieved our clients are once they finally get this behind them, once they finally get their asylum interview scheduled so that they can win their case, putting on the path to permanent residency and then U.S. citizenship. Winning asylum is a life-changing event, but you can't win asylum if you don't have your interview. Now, the good news is that mandamus is a very effective tool for getting what's owed to you, adjudication of your asylum claim. All right, I keep using the word mandamus, which is by no means a common word, so let's step back and define it. Now, derived from Latin, mandamus means we command. So a mandamus lawsuit is a legal petition filed against a government agency, in this case USCIS, for failing to perform a duty that's owed to you, in this case, your asylum interview. Now, it's not a plea, but rather a command from a federal court to compel action on part of the agency, cutting through bureaucratic delays. So with a mandamus lawsuit, you're asking a judge to tell USCIS that it has to do its job, that it has to give you your asylum interview and then your decision. You see, USCIS has a duty to act in a reasonable time on any immigration application. And when they don't do that, well, you can sue them. You bring a lawsuit in federal court, and this particular type of lawsuit is called, you guessed it, a mandamus lawsuit. And so if the judge agrees that the delay by USCIS in your case is unreasonable, then the judge will order USCIS to take action. And they will, I assure you, take that action. And the beautiful thing is that this tactic very often works where other attempts to spur progress in your case don't do the trick. So yes, you can call and email the asylum office to inquire as to the status of your case, and you can beg them to schedule your interview. You can have a member of Congress in your district inquire with USCIS on your behalf, and you can do a so-called ombudsman inquiry. But I've got to tell you, these are, in my experience, both as a former asylum officer and now as an asylum lawyer, almost guaranteed to fail. They just don't work. And the same is true of requests to have your case expedited on urgent humanitarian grounds. This rarely is effective in moving your asylum case forward. Now, a mandamus lawsuit, on the other hand, packs a powerful punch. When a federal judge talks, USCIS listens, and this is by far the most effective means to get your asylum case unstuck. Okay, let's turn now to who can benefit from a mandamus lawsuit. This is part 2 of 5 in your ultimate guide to mandamus lawsuits as a mean to move your stalled asylum case forward. Now, I said earlier that the judge is assessing whether the wait in your case is reasonable. That's really the crux of the matter. So the operative question then is how that term reasonable is defined when it comes to asylum delays, because you need your delay to be considered unreasonable in order to benefit from a mandamus lawsuit. So what kind of wait is unreasonable? Let's say you applied for asylum 7 years ago and you still haven't had your interview. Is that delay reasonable? What about just maybe 6 months? You've been waiting for 6 months. Well, can you sue the government just 6 months after applying for asylum and expect the judge to agree that this wait time is unreasonable? Well, here's the thing. There's no bright line test, which is to say, there's no set definition or standard anywhere that tells us what kind of wait is necessarily reasonable and what's not reasonable. Instead, it's kind of a moving target. It's actually open to interpretation. But based on what the courts have said about this, and in my experience, both as a government immigration officer and now as a lawyer who uses mandamus lawsuits all the time, I would say that 3 years is the minimum. Chances for success with a mandamus lawsuit are low if you sue before you hit that 3-year mark, meaning if you sue less than years after having applied for asylum. And the longer that you've waited, well, yeah, the better your chances for success with a mandamus lawsuit. So if someone had waited 10 years, and yes, there are people whose cases have been pending for a decade, well, then you would have an excellent chance for success. Pretty much any judge is going to agree that this delay of a decade is unreasonable, so you'll almost certainly win. But now, let's back up to the examples that I gave you earlier. A 6-month wait is not enough. You'd probably lose if you sued after waiting just 6 months for your asylum interview. Now, the other example I gave, 7 years waiting, well, that would put you in great shape in terms of your odds for success. You'll likely win your mandamus lawsuit. You've been waiting 5 years? Yes, very good chance for success with your mandamus claim. Now, at 3 years, which we consider right now to be the minimum threshold, well, I'd say there's a good chance for success. It's definitely not guaranteed. You've got to be ready to fight to the bitter end in federal court to convince the judge to side with you. Okay, in summary, I recommend that you not bring a mandamus suit until your case has been pending for at least 3 years. And the longer that you've been waiting, the greater your chances are for success with this tactic. Now, let me touch briefly on why you should be trying to get your interview and decision as soon as possible. Now, there are reasons beyond the obvious ones that, you're sick of waiting and you want confidence around your ability to stay safe and build your life in America. You see, the sooner you're able to present your case, the better your chances for success. That's right. The more time that passes, the harder it is to win. Now, the reasons for this are beyond the scope of this training, but suffice it to say that 1, the officer is inclined to say, well, yeah, I understand some bad things happened or whatever, but that was a really long time ago. Why do you think someone still wants to harm you now after all this time? And so the more time that has passed between the relevant incidents in your case and the time of your interview, the more skeptical the officer will probably be in your case. And 2, conditions in your country could change, or at least appear to have changed in a way that undercuts your case. Now remember, country conditions play a significant role in the asylum eligibility analysis. And I often see cases harmed because of changes on the ground in a person's home country. And note also that the sooner you win asylum, the sooner you can get permanent residency. Having asylum status comes with certain benefits and privileges, yes. And then permanent residency, well, it comes with even more. And then 4 years after getting your so-called green card, your permanent residency, well, you're eligible to apply for U.S. citizenship. And that's the most stable status that you can possibly have. It comes with the most rights and benefits. So you should be trying to get there as soon as you possibly can. And it all starts with having your asylum interview so that you can win your case and proceed on the path to U.S. citizenship. So let's move your asylum case forward now, okay? By the way, if you want to maximize your chances for asylum success, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so that you don't miss the insights that I share on this channel. All right, you know now who can benefit from a mandamus lawsuit and why it's in your interest to move your case forward as quickly as possible. So let's turn now in part 3 of this training to how it works practically, like what are the steps and processes involved in suing the government to force your asylum interview. So it starts with filing what's called a complaint with a federal court having jurisdiction over your case. Now, you unfortunately can't just pick whichever court you think will be most favorable to you. There are actually strict rules about this. And if you file in the wrong place, well, your case will get rejected. So you've got to figure out what your options are and go from there. Now, my law firm usually files in the federal district court that is responsible for the area where the relevant asylum office is located. Now, what is the complaint and how do you actually file it? Well, the complaint is a document in which you've set forth the nature of your case. You're explaining what you're seeking and why you're entitled to it under the law. Now, in a mandamus case, this means you're explaining that you've been waiting for too long for your interview, and you're asking the judge to compel the asylum office to take action. You need to briefly explain any efforts you've made in the past to get your case moving, and you need to point to the federal laws on which your case is based. The authority that says that, yeah, under these circumstances, you're entitled to your interview. Now, a complaint is not a super long document. That may come later in a legal brief that you'll need to do if the government wants to fight the case. But it's highly technical. You've got to get it right, this complaint, or the case will get dismissed. The federal rules of civil procedure, which govern court filings like this, are unforgiving. The smallest mistake can lead to rejection. Now, if you can't tell by now, this stuff can be tricky. There are plenty of legal actions that I think a layperson without a lawyer can perform perfectly fine by themselves when it comes to immigration without a lawyer, but this is not one of them. Matters in federal court are no joke. I strongly recommend that you hire a lawyer for your mandamus case. So once you've got the complaint ready, we're going to file it online through the federal court's filing system. Now, next, the court needs to produce a few related documents that we'll attach to copies of your lawsuit. And then we'll send this packet to all the people whom we're suing. And this usually includes the Department of Homeland Security and USCIS as entities, along with their respective leaders, and also with the director of the asylum office in question. Now, mailing this packet to them to inform them of the lawsuit constitutes service. And after they receive this service, well, the government has 60 days to respond and tell the judge what its position is regarding our lawsuit. And here's the magical part. So usually during this 60-day period, the lawyer for the government calls my office and says, "Hey, Brian, we don't really want to fight this case. It's just not a priority for us to fight this out in this time-consuming, costly legal battle in court. So if your client will agree to drop the lawsuit, to terminate it, then, well, we'll give them the interview and decision. Sound good?" And here's the thing. If you've submitted a solid complaint, making it clear that you've got a good legal basis for the lawsuit, and if your case has been stalled for multiple years, then the lawyers for the government, well, they know that you're probably going to win your mandamus case. So they don't want to fight a drawn-out battle if they think they're probably going to lose anyway. So instead of going through this hassle and taking this risk, well, they just give up. They give in, telling you that if you make the lawsuit go away, well, they'll give you what you want. And that's how it works. Most mandamus lawsuits get settled without actually having to fight it out in extensive legal proceedings in federal court. Rather, most times the government caves. They say, "We don't want to deal with this," and they get USCIS to schedule your interview. So when this happens, when the government lawyer calls me and makes this offer, well, we say, "Okay, well, for now, we'll just agree to pause the lawsuit, but not dismiss it yet entirely." You see, we'll agree to pause it to give USCIS a bit of time to conduct the interview and to issue a decision, but we don't agree to actually dismiss it until you've got that decision, the asylum decision, in your hand. We want to keep the pressure on USCIS to move forward quickly in your case right to the very end. So we only dismiss the mandamus case once your asylum case is completely done. And it's usually during the 60 days that the government has to respond to our complaint that USCIS, in fact, issues the interview notice. This is the letter informing you of the date and time of your asylum interview. Now, you'll notice that I said that the process that I just described is usually how it unfolds when you sue, right? Well, sometimes the government lawyers don't agree to settle. They may want to fight it out in court. Again, the longer you've been waiting, the more likely you are to have success in your mandamus claim, and the more likely the government is to give you your interview without fighting about it in court. But you do need to be prepared to do battle if necessary. You need to be prepared for the possibility of protracted litigation in court, where the government is trying to bury you in motions and other legal maneuvers. So when the government does decide to fight a case, rather than settling right away, it's going to take a while to play out. You're looking at probably at least 1 year before the judge issues a final decision, and maybe considerably longer. But here's the thing. Even if you do have to fight the full case, such that it takes a while to get your interview scheduled, your asylum case is still almost certain to get resolved faster than it would have had you just waited for your interview and not sued. You see, if you've been waiting for years for your asylum interview, then I unfortunately do not think that it's likely that you're going to get that interview for multiple years still to come. Because of the asylum backlog and the way that USCIS scheduling priorities work, I just don't see much hope for anyone who's been waiting for years to get their interview anytime soon. I think you're looking at years more of waiting unless you sue. And so the ideal, and definitely the most common, scenario with a mandamus lawsuit involves getting your interview very quickly after suing, in a matter usually of a few short months. But sometimes, it's true, you may have to fight the case to the end in court, which will probably mean at least a year before you get your interview notice. But even that extended timeline is better than if you were to do nothing, okay? All right, before I speak in more detail about the timeline you can expect for actually getting your interview through a mandamus lawsuit, let me address one more thing you need to know about. And it concerns your own level of engagement in cases where you hire a lawyer for a mandamus case. And I've got good news on this front. It's minimal. You're aware that developing an asylum case is a ton of work. As the applicant, for you, it's hard. Fortunately, it's not like that with a mandamus claim. For mandamus, it's pretty much all on the lawyer's shoulders. My office does all the heavy lifting. You almost certainly won't be asked to testify or to ever show up in court. You almost certainly won't have to write out any declarations or anything like that. So with this particular kind of lawsuit, it's all about what your lawyers do on paper and in negotiating with the government's lawyers. So rest assured that you won't have to pour into your mandamus case the kind of emotional energy and time that you're mustering for your underlying asylum claim. When it comes to mandamus, it's all on us. Okay, in part 4 of our mandamus tutorial, we're going to get more specific on the timeline. How long will it take you to get your asylum interview and then your decision after you file the mandamus lawsuit? Well, as with all things related to immigration, it depends. We of course can't say exactly how long it'll take to get your interview and decision, but I can tell you about what we've been seeing recently. So in cases where the government does not elect to fight the case, but instead calls and offers to give you your interview in exchange for getting the lawsuit settled, we've been seeing the asylum interview occur on average about 3 months after we filed the lawsuit. After filing, it takes a week or two for us to serve the government, which starts the 60-day countdown clock for the government lawyers to tell the judge where the government stands on the matter. And it's usually near the end of those 60 days that they reach out to us with the asylum interview notice and an offer to settle. And the time between us receiving the interview notice and the date of the actual interview, well, it can vary, but probably averages about 1 month. So if you do all that math, we're looking at probably a little over 3 months on average to actually do the interview after we file the mandamus lawsuit. But again, it varies. Sometimes it's considerably quicker. We've had clients do their interview just a couple weeks after suing. But on the other hand, we've seen the interview get scheduled for several months, and in one case that I can recall, about 8 months after we sued. Now, that's annoying, of course, but it's still a much better outcome than if you hadn't sued, in which case you'd probably be looking at multiple years before having your interview. All right, that's the interview. But what about getting the decision for your asylum case? Now, we find that in most cases, a decision is forthcoming quite quickly after the interview, where we force the interview through a mandamus lawsuit. Usually, it's a matter of a couple weeks, but sometimes it's a bit more. With us keeping the lawsuit alive, if in a pause mode, until the asylum case is completely concluded, well, we keep the pressure on USCIS to issue the decision quickly. And this is actually a major benefit of mandamus. You see, some people wait for years for their interview, and then they wait months or even, yes, years after the interview for the decision. And that happens all the time with cases where the interview happens organically, or i.e., when it's not scheduled as a result of a mandamus lawsuit. But with mandamus, well, you're pushing forward not just the interview, but also the decision. Okay, the fact that you've made it this far in the mandamus tutorial means that you're serious about your case, and I commend you for that, okay? Now in part 5, the last part, we're wrapping up by addressing a very common and understandable concern that people have when they learn about this powerful tool for moving a stalled asylum case forward. Now, I get this question all the time. Brian, will suing the government hurt my underlying asylum case? Will suing the government make me look bad? Will it cause the asylum officer to view me negatively since I had the audacity to challenge the US government in a lawsuit? Basically, will it hurt my asylum case? Now, I understand these concerns. They're completely reasonable, but I'm here to tell you emphatically that no, I do not think that suing the government to force your asylum interview will negatively affect your underlying asylum claim in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I don't worry at all for our clients about any negative impact. So first of all, it's important to understand that asylum officers who are focused on reviewing applications and conducting interviews, well, they might not even be aware of the fact that you sued to get your interview. Now, when I was an asylum officer with USCIS, we didn't even know if someone we were interviewing had brought a Mandamus lawsuit. That information, well, it simply didn't go in the asylum file that we were dealing with. And second, even if the asylum officer does know that you sued, well, I just don't think that they'll care. You see, the notion of litigation carries a different weight and meaning in the United States than it might in other countries. So here, legal action is a common recourse for asserting rights and seeking remedies. So for us, suing just isn't a big deal. Also, I think an officer is likely to be understanding that someone in your position would take this action. It's reasonable to want to move on with your life, to put your asylum case behind you. And it's critical to remember that an asylum officer cannot deny your claim based on the mere fact that you've sued the government. Asylum decisions are supposed to be made based on specific, objective criteria related to your situation and eligibility. The officer, they have to explain their reasoning if they want to deny someone, pointing to specific factors that in fact support a denial. And the fact that someone sued the US government is not among the things that can be used as a justification for a denial. The officer's supervisor won't accept it. So I want you to know that taking legal action is both your right and a viable option to move forward with your case without jeopardizing your chances for success in your asylum case. Okay, congratulations. You're almost to the end of this Mandamus tutorial. Before we close, I want to make good on a promise that I made to you at the beginning concerning a certain statistic that I think will inspire you. And that statistic is 100%. That's my law firm's success rate at the time that I'm making this video in Mandamus cases. And we've been bringing a lot of these lawsuits recently. Now, let me stress that past performance does not guarantee future results. The fact that we've so far succeeded every time in forcing an interview with Mandamus does not mean that it will always be that way. But so far, it has, in fact, worked every single time. And what's more, we've never had to actually fight a case to the end in federal court. Rather, with every Mandamus claim we've brought, the government has quickly issued an interview notice. In other words, to date, we've gotten our clients what they wanted. We've moved their asylum case forward. Now, to be clear, I cannot and do not guarantee that we'll succeed if you end up hiring my law firm for a Mandamus claim, but I personally am extremely proud of our record so far in these cases, and I hope that this news inspires you and causes you to think seriously about using this powerful tool to get your asylum interview and decision. All right, that's the Mandamus training, folks. Congratulations on making it to the end. And listen, we would love to talk in detail about your situation and see if we think we may be able to help you with the Mandamus case. So call my office today to schedule a consultation. That number is 713-909-0401. And remember, we help people all over the country, so it doesn't matter where you live. Call us now to schedule an asylum strategy session so that we can help you to secure your future in America through asylum. Again, I'm Brian Manning, and it's an honor to support you in your asylum journey.